ladies and gentlemen, as you see, a child without any identification or anything can buy $50 worth of Robux, okay? I'm sure you gotta factor in the exchange rate differences as well, but you get the idea. So now I'm actually connected to free up to about 5 minutes. It actually is building up. I got Robux. And now I can't buy the Robux, don't have any money. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you see, a child without any identification or anything can buy $50 worth of Robux, okay? I'm sure you gotta factor in the exchange rate differences as well, but you get the idea. So now I'm actually connected to the game over here. I'm just gonna buy anything, okay? Now where the entire argument of gambling comes into is some of these games actually have microtransactions or moments where you can actually pay for items and get percent chances on something unique, which if you don't know, constitutes into the gambling premise as well, alright? You are effectively gambling when you are playing for chance. This kind of stuff, when kids get access to, can be highly addictive, alright? Again, it's addictive for adults. So here, let's pick a bet real quick. I don't even know how this game works that well. I'm gonna name it Butt Plug. Can I get away with it? Oh my god, it's censored! God bless. Now, there's entire stores here you can play. First off, this is a pretty decent looking game. You can spend like $10,000 to unlock other sections as well. I guess here I'm picking up money. Oh, dude, I am actually picking up money. God damn. This is like the World of Warcraft Gold Army experience. I actually feel like I'm in a goddamn sweatshop right now. What is this? Now, when you go to the exclusive shop on all of this, ladies and gentlemen, what's even wilder is when you look at the pricing for this. Now, this is a limited time item. Exclusive, huge! Get a huge blue balloon pet! 5% chance to rainbow. Again, when you're playing for percent chances, you are effectively getting kids into the slot machine meta, which is, by the way, one of the most highly addictive gambling metas out there. And again, like Black Buddha, what difference is this between a loot box? Not really, except if you actually look into the regulations and laws of loot boxes, you would probably realize that they're actually starting to get banned in certain parts of the world because they're just straight up gambling. So again, if you look at 18,000 Robux here, how much is 18,999 Robux? Now, when you look closely at 24,900, it's somewhere between the $139 package and the $279 package. I'm gonna go with the assumption that this is somewhere in the $200, $210. What child is going to go onto Roblox and purchase the blue balloon pet for $200 and get a 5% chance drop for whatever the hell the rainbow version is, okay? What is actually going on with this goddamn website? You've got other situations where they got experimental eggs, and they've got their percentage drops for all of these. So you can spend money to get like a 0.5%, the 13%, the 20%, the 35%. In fact, I'm gonna gamble right now in front of you, okay? Because as an adult, I wanna see what the hell is actually going on. Again, there wasn't even a driver's license. It's not like they checked anything. They just literally gave this to you, okay? They let anybody have access. So here I got an egg right now in my inventory. Let me just find it. What is it? Exclusive egg? Yeah, I want to open it. Let's see what I got. Oh, dude, I got the prickly panda, the exclusive. I believe that's like the actual shittiest one that you can get. I had to look into Roblox's terms of services, and really I found one post all the way back from 2019 in July, where Roblox officially said, in order to add further details to the user-generated content guidelines, they basically have to state what the expectations for what users are paying for when it comes to virtual items. So under their POS, developers must indicate the actual numerical odds, like we saw earlier with the various pets, a 30% chance, for instance, of what users would receive when they buy a random virtual item in games and Robux or various other currencies. So you have to pretty much state what your chances of winning are, and this is kind of in line with a lot of modern AAA games with loot mechanics in them in certain countries. You just have to tell you what the percentage of your win rate be, whether it be 30% or like 0.3%, you just have to know. It also doesn't apply to game include mechanics where a virtual reward is provided in exchange for completing an action. Like for instance, if you be a Pokemon or a pet in the game, you can actually get like a specific reward for it, right? Kind of like a video game where you just beat something, you get an XP reward, money reward, or maybe an item reward. That doesn't have to be mentioned. Anything with Robux has to be. Now, what really
capital, the dictator's handbook becoming a statue that reads quotes out of a loudspeaker throughout the day, and policies for citizens that limit all freedom of speech, freedom of movement, and leaving period. You just can't leave Turkmenistan. This obscurity is what makes these nations relatively harmless on the global stage. They only really hurt themselves. But this is where China differs. Since 1949, when Chairman Mao took over, China has innovated almost nothing. Other than the starvation of tens of millions of people, but that's hardly innovation, that's just dead. What China did do is become a manufacturing hub for pretty much the entire world. Don't believe me? Look at the world's biggest trade partner, the USA, go from dominance only to be completely surpassed by China. China didn't need to invent anything. They didn't need to innovate. They didn't need to change. The West foolishly believed that given access to money and capitalism, China would be able to change and become friendly to the West. So the money poured in. For the past 40 years, American and other Western companies and governments have been dumping trillions of dollars of investment into China with no requirements in return. Basically like this. Here's money, China. Now we've got to get things going here, so please don't steal our tech and intellectual property, and please consider allowing your citizens some more freedom, maybe liberalize a little bit. You know what China's response to that always was? Nah. And by the way, if you want the privilege of investing in our country, our glorious China, then you're going to have to give us the lion's share of profit and control. Oh, and also, we're going to steal all of your intellectual property, military tech, and hack you, so we get everything we need. Then we're going to kick you out of China after attracting years of investment. Also, we can close off again. And this time, we're going to close off with money and leverage over the entire world economy. So now that you understand the basic idea, let's look at this fortress that Xi Jinping is building to finish it off once and for all and become the world power. To understand the fortress, you have to understand the goal. The goal is to build a post-Western world, a world where innovation isn't necessary anymore. It's just a world where China controls what countries do to its own benefit. Freedom and human rights do not belong in this world. It's just state leadership that benefits those at the top of the state. That's really the only goal. The base of the fortress is economic, commercial, and financial. China has had 40 years to develop, and while it's absolutely nowhere near finished, in fact, it's very poor in much of the country, it is at a point where Xi Jinping has decided that it's done. One of the things that Xi Jinping decided he'd be famous for in history was the eradication of poverty in China. Poverty wasn't eradicated, by the way, guys. I don't know why people even believe this ridiculous statement. It's not even close, but Xi Jinping said it was and then made it illegal to say that there's still poverty in China, so that's good enough, I guess. Anyway, 40 years of globalization has put China in a position where the elite are well off enough and hold enough power to control the country. Enough foreign tech has been stolen and nationalized, and China now has domestic brands dominating national manufacturing. There's no more need for foreign brands for many things. From electric cars to refrigerators, China has a domestic equivalent, albeit a worse quality one, for nearly everything. Don't be fooled, China doesn't need to make things very well. They only figured out how to make a ballpoint pen, for God's sakes, a few years ago. But they make enough stuff domestically to satiate China's own needs. All the while, China's trying to reduce the world's dependence on the dollar. It's already gotten Russia and some of the Middle East on board with its pursuit of this digital yuan, the dream of de-dollarizing the world. The next pillar of this fortress is political and ideological control. COVID-19 has turned the world into chaos. But for China, well, it's even more chaotic. Xi Jinping's zero COVID policy has created absolute chaos and dissent. From Chinese people begging for their children not to be taken away to quarantine camps, to month after month of whale-jet into your house level lockdowns, leading to suicide, starvation, and absolute madness. To the COVID quarantine camps turning China into a medical slave state. To the absolute stagnation of the economy because of said lockdowns, you would think that China would be on the brink of revolution at this point. I mean, you satiate China's own needs. All the while, China's trying to reduce the world's dependence on the dollar. It's already gotten Russia and some of the Middle East on board with its pursuit of this digital yuan, the dream of de-dollarizing the world. The next pillar of this fortress is political and ideological control. COVID-19 has turned the world into chaos. But for China, well, it's even more chaotic. Xi Jinping's zero COVID policy has created absolute chaos and dissent. From Chinese people begging for their children not to be taken away to quarantine camps, to month after month of whale-jet into your house level lockdowns, leading to suicide, starvation, and absolute madness. To the COVID quarantine camps turning China into a medical slave state. To the absolute stagnation of the economy because of said lockdowns, you would think that China would be on the brink of revolution at this point. I mean, you do this anywhere else and people are going to stand up. But quite the contrary. COVID has been the greatest gift to the Chinese government that's ever been given to anyone. A surveillance system that literally tracks everywhere you go at all times. Limits everything you can do down to a QR code. You cannot go shopping. You cannot get on public transport. You cannot go through a toll booth. You cannot take your kids to school. You cannot go to work. You cannot literally exist without a green QR code. If it turns yellow or red, you stay where you are in lockdown. And if you try to escape, you go to jail. If you try to escape these lockdowns, like many have, you will be tracked with facial recognition and stopped in your tracks with one of China's 540 million surveillance cameras run by the state. China has more surveillance cameras than the population of the United States. The ability to track and stop anyone, anywhere, at any time has now become realized. You get that? This is not like some future goal. This is not a movie script. This is done. It's already finished. This capability is real. Every single thing you do, motion you make, word you type, person you speak to, everything is tracked and documented, and you cannot escape. It's literally that bad. Imagine if Kim Jong-un didn't have to rely on secret police. It's kind of like that. China is now a technologically controlled dungeon of slaves that cannot do anything that the state deems unsavory. You can't complain, you go to jail. You can see how effective this has actually become. People always said, you take away Chinese people's money, then they'll finally stand up and overthrow the government. But people across much of China are not even getting paid anymore. I've got reports from people north to south that haven't received wages from not only companies, but state jobs as well. Do you see or hear anything about that? Exactly. The cult of personality surrounding Xi has now reached Mao caliber. Xi's thoughts are mandated and taught at all levels of education, and citizens in one of the 100 million government jobs are quizzed daily on Xi Jinping's ideology. And there's pillar 3, state-surveilled slavery, with a god figure at the top dictating every move of every citizen. Gun. Pillar 4, the final beam in the structure of this fortress for China's world domination, is the destruction of the US and Western alliances and spheres of influence, including Japan and South Korea, etc., while simultaneously forcing and strengthening and modernizing China's military and nuclear arsenal. This is done by bringing developing countries into its economic servitude, solidifying allies like Russia and other countries that oppose the West and democracy in general, and amplifying propaganda, hacking, disruption tactics, sowing political division, and many more underhanded things. China is employing countless influencers, buying politicians, and sending millions of bots and paid trolls to sway online opinion. I've seen people that you would never think to be pro-Chinese government being swayed by paid agents who go out there and spread information that preys on the division in current American society. People don't even have to end up pro-Chinese government. In the end, that's not the goal. They just have to contribute to the collapse of Western society. I've seen a massive uptick in this after China allied with Russia after the Ukrainian invasion. These treasonous scumbags who contribute to seeing division in the West because China co-opted them to do it either ended up richer or they get paid in clout and followers, but they end up getting away with it because they're protected by free speech laws. It's the very definition of using America's system against itself. China blocks all Western social media, but it uses it for its own government agendas to contribute to the downfall of Western systems and democracy. Beyond ideology, China's modernizing its military capabilities to the point where it knows it will have to face down the US in battle at some point in the future. Whether it be over Taiwan or some other future conflict, China aims to weaken the US and its allies and then strike when it's divided to the point where morale is too low for Americans to even stand up for themselves. Now, here's the deal. All this doom and gloom that I just spouted is China's plan. But all of this hinges on China pulling this dystopian nightmare off. They have successfully neutered their own populace and crushed any and all dissent. So even if worse comes to worse and everything collapses, the government still does have ultimate control over the people. But the only real way this can work is for people around the world to roll over and accept it. To basically say, yeah, sure, China, whatever, take over, go for it. Without investments or supporting China can do nothing. The rest of the world investing in China, expecting it to reform, is why we got here in the first place. It's why I'm making this video now. If people stop feeding the money,